okay. Sweet. So we're already recording. We can just jump into it.
Fabulous.
All right.
Yeah,
Well, I was just gonna like say for those who don't know, welcome to the podcast, Jacqueline Dobrinska. She is the host of the Ram Dass podcast, a herbalist, an author. Uh, so many things, and so yeah. Welcome to the podcast, Jacqueline.
I'm
Thank you
super
for
glad
being
to be
here.
here. My cat's just deciding to join us too, so
Oh, really? You
hopefully
have a
she
cat?
won't be too obnoxious.
Oh, I love cats.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I was wondering if maybe we could start off with a fun fact about yourself, maybe that nobody knows. I don't know if
Oh, a fun fact that this is the this is always a hard one. Um, Fun fact. Well, you mentioned I'm an herbalist. I do love herbs, so that's not something that people don't know. Um, there she is. um,
uh
I don't know. I feel like everybody knows everything about me. I don't know. I've spent forever studying 1,001 different paths. So I think that's where people are like, wait, aren't you a yogi? I teach yoga. I'm like, well, yeah, but I also studied, the Western European wise woman tradition, and I studied Peruvian based plant medicine work. And there's just a lot of traditions that I've been a part of that I feel really grateful that I've um, Ram Dass talks about being like a hummingbird and drinking from the nectar of many flowers. And I feel like I've
oh wow.
definitely gone down that path. Christian mysticism, Kabbalah, lots of different things.
Yeah. Yeah. I love that. I there's also like the uh Ram Dass always well, not always, in some of his talks he would say like, just let these teachings like go through you, and just like hold them in your head and pick them up, drop them down, just let them kind of wash you.
Yeah, yeah,
And
absolutely.
yeah, can I have one question
Mhm.
regarding that? Because I was reading one of the 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 letters that you guys send for subscribers in the mail and stuff like that,
Yeah.
which I love being part of the satsang of of Ramdas. Is
Yeah.
so cool. Recommend
Yeah.
it to anybody who wants to check it out. But the my question is, there's a little part in the transcript of it that says that there's a monk story. I think it's a Zen story about the guy who asked the Zen teacher how long it's going to take to get enlightened. And the first time he says 10 years, and then he asks again and he says 20 years, and then he asks again and he says 30 years. And he's like, why do you keep adding years? And he says, well, if you have one eye on the goal, you only have one eye to do the work. And that's going to like slow you down tremendously. And I just think that is
It's sort of
like
like that analogy of uh, once you plant the seed, you don't keep digging it up to see if it's growing.
mm,
You just keep, letting it do its thing. I think that's also similar message.
yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, right. Cause there does seem to be like almost like this rush, right? Like there's I mean, um I don't know, I feel like people tend to think that faster is better, especially over in the West,
Yeah.
you
And we
know?
get really caught in striving, right? Like I'm here and the goal is over there and I need to get there quickly and here isn't okay. Like there is somehow better. And so we bring that
Right.
same mentality to everything we do, including our spiritual practice, right? And so as when we're focused on the there, we're missing the mystical now, right? Which
Yeah.
is where all of it is. Whether or not, not, I'm certainly not there all the time. None of us are, but that's I think a little bit closer to um, just the place we're wanting, that we're striving for, that we're longing for.
Mm, right. Like we get that taste through something,
Hmm.
and And it's like now that we've tasted that, it's how can we get that again?
Yeah. Yeah.
But was the goal like to go back to the way we were before we got that little taste, like that sense of, I'm just here, I don't really want to go anywhere, but you're also not really I guess a scientific word for it, as the episode for this week said, is consciousness, right? We're not really conscious of um ourselves or whatever.
Yeah. I mean, I certainly don't have all of the answers about anything. But I do, I have this sense that all of us are longing. We're longing for just a sense of wholeness and okayness, and that connection to that part of ourselves that is beyond separateness. Um,
Mm,
and there's 10,000 paths to get there. Um, and we glimpse it. I think that's what you're talking about. Maybe we glimpse it through psychedelics, or maybe we glimpse it through meditation, or maybe we glimpse it through. There's a Ram Dass story where he talks about the woman crocheting, who like knew exactly what he was talking about because she would enter into those like trance like states, right? So there's 1,001 ways to get there, and then the mind is so tricky, right? So we have this experience, and then we sort of conceptualize it, and we make it a thing that we want to get back to, and then we
mm,
push everything else away. Like that's the thing I want, and it's that striving to now I got to get back to that. And all of many of the scriptures talk about our our suffering is because of our attraction and aversion. And so as soon as we've conceptualized something and want to get to it, now we've created more attraction and aversion. And so it's like, can we just be with what is? And often it's hard. But I think that's part of that letting go of that striving. Makes any
yeah.
sense?
Yeah, yeah, that makes sense. Ram Dass also talks a lot about living on multiple levels of reality at the same
Mm-hmm.
time. And I
Mm-hmm.
think there's a little confusion uh in that aspect because like let's say you are experiencing a negative experience, um you wouldn't like say I want this reality, but how do you like not use that as like there are multiple realities to say, okay, I want to go to this reality, and that way you're not really dealing with this reality, but
Yeah, I
it's
mean, I don't know if I again. So one of the things that I think you're pointing to is this tendency many of us have to spiritual bypass of like, this is uncomfortable, so I'm just gonna like um, spiritualize it in some way. But and often when we do that, we're really pushing away. It's the aversion piece, right? So there's like multiple planes of reality of like, one of the things I love about Roundos is, this man was at the forefront of psychotherapy. He did hundreds and hundreds of LSD trips, and he spent decades in a spiritual practice. And he would still talk about his neuroses, right? He called them my little schmooze, and he would invite them in for tea. And so it's not like he ever
right.
got rid of those things. They hooked him less. And to me,
Oh,
that's one of like his biggest teachings, because I think in spirituality, we so often want to get away from the things that we see as distasteful on this plane of our like our humanness, as if it's somehow wrong and bad and we messed it up somehow. um and just that like letting go of the tension and making friends with it, I think is just one of his most incredible things that he brings to this world, and his just humor and lightness around being human. And so yeah, we and many of us that very few of us are living from that real experience
mm,
of being one with everything. It might be a concept that we can
yeah,
kind of get, but very few of us are living from that plane. Maybe we glimpse it from time to time, and that's amazing. Like, what an incredible gift. um
yeah,
but just to be honest, I think about where we are, and that we and he also didn't talk about, you know, trying to just live from one plane. He talked about, whoops,
oh,
the thing just unplugged. Sorry.
all good, I guess you're
Coming
still
back.
in.
Um and just this like So, when we're having I love there's another story of his where he talks about the picture frame, and like when we're having really dark moments, um it's like the picture only shows the cloud, but if you expand the picture frame a little bit, then you'll be able to see a little bit of the blue sky. So I think that like tethering to another plane of awareness is just like taking that little bit of a step back and being like, oh, this thought that tells me all these terrible things, like it's not the whole of who I am. And just like take like, okay, if I just pay attention to my breath and be in this moment for a minute, like maybe I can get a little bit more space to see that other part of myself. Um, and that little bit of a blue sky becomes more apparent.
Mm.
I don't, I guess.
No, yeah, yeah. Yeah, and like, how do we like I guess make that window a little bigger or
Practice.
mm,
I mean, I think there's the practice of, what's so much of what meditation is about is um, not getting caught by the fluctuations of the mind. And it's called practice for a reason, right? So we do a little bit every day so that when the big stuff comes up, we're like, all right, and we're still going to get hooked. It's okay. But
mhm,
that's how we do it is, um, I also think it's just that piece of making friends, like, is such a key piece, bringing compassion to those challenging parts of ourselves.
mhm. Yeah, there's also that idea of traps. You know, he talks a lot about how meditation, like
Mm,
every method is a trap.
mhm,
And I find that so interesting how like for example, like church, you know, a lot of people will go to church, but there won't be anything there. They're just good at going to church or people meditating, you know, they'll just be sitting there and there's nothing happening. They're just good meditators, you know.
yeah, yeah.
But yeah, how do you like know when you are, you know, doing something or just meditating or like you're in the trap or, you know, connected
Well,
to your true self?
yeah, I mean, as he says, all methods are traps. And what I think of it a little different. I think of all methods as boats, right? Like we're
Mm,
trying to get from this limited perspective to a more expanded perspective. Um, and we have to get a I mean, and we can't necessarily swim across. And so these methods are these boats or these doorposts is something that he would say sometimes. Um, these boats that sort of like help anchor us to a particular practice so we can sort of navigate through the bardos of sorts, like through the like craziness of sorts. um and eventually we get to have this more expanded perspective, but then eventually we hit up against like being so attached to the boat that at some point we actually have to let the boat go too.
mm,
um yeah, because the mind is like incredible. The mind is tricky. The mind is quite often our master, and so these methods um just help us get out of those habits um that keep
mm.
us stuck.
Yeah. And the idea is to like use it knowingly.
Hmm. That it's not that it's there's a I don't know, I learned it from some Zen teachers, but this idea of um they're all just fingers pointing to the moon, and we get all so caught up in the fingers. So like we get so caught up in the method that's trying to get us to that expanded state. And we have to remember that it's the expanded state we really want to get to. So there's no use in fighting over whose method is better, or like really, this is who I am now because I use this method, which is easy. The ego is just going to do that. It's going to identify with things, and will often use spirituality as just another. I mean, that was my cat. Is it back in now?
I can't see you,
Okay, let
but
me see.
I can hear you.
There we go.
Oh, there we go. Yeah.
Anyway,
Yeah,
but I
it
don't know,
kind of.
you know, when is it the true self? Um, you know, in the yoga tradition, they talk about D, like this, you know, you have all of the senses pulling at you, you have all of the memories pulling at you, you have this ego sense pulling at you, this somebody training, and then you have this like buddhi,
Mm,
this like um this thing that can attach to the you know, whether you call it God or Atman or whatever, guru. And that every once in a while when you like practice stilling those other things, that the D, like these drops of intuition and wisdom come in. And you know, like sometimes you have that sense of like, oh, that's intuitive insight. um
mm.
and then sometimes, you know, and sometimes you're like, it's feels like that, and then you follow it and you're like, well, that turned out to a big mess. And sometimes it turns out into this brilliance, and that's just like part of it.
Right, like the difference between studying and like living.
Hmm.
Yeah, there's a lot of times when you're almost like you rather like listen to teachings and think that you are like getting better in that sense for somehow, instead of like doing what they're telling you to do and like actually have that connection with the divine through, you know, the
Our innate
nature or
connection.
whatever
Yeah.
you want to call it.
Yeah. True nature. Yeah.
Yeah, and there's also the idea of this it being like this always, even like after death. And I just think that is so interesting because if this is it, then um like like you know, you can meditate, um but you might as well just I don't know, because Ramdas says that a lot, like get on with it, right? He's there's nowhere to go and nothing to do,
No place to stand.
no place to stand, and
Mhm.
no one to do it. Yeah, and that I think that can get a little confusing in the sense of like, well, we're here, and it seems like we're so not perfect, and we there's a lot of like closing of the heart. I would say that that feels unnecessary, but every time that Ramdas or people talk about, or I open my heart, it hurts. You know, like opening the heart is painful. And why do you think is that? Is it always painful to open the heart?
There's a quote that says the safest place is an open heart, uh, which is a really tall order, because this world, we see a lot of suffering, and to open
Yeah.
to suffering is painful. And I was just actually listening to a lecture today. It's going to be the next podcast. Um,
Oh, cool.
and a woman was, it's a story that Ramdas has shared before about a woman's, um, you know, giving money to a houseless person that she sees every day, who lives on, you know, who's on the corner with his, and she's like, at this point, it's in my budget. Um, you know, and as she was going through his course, she began to realize that she hadn't really seen this person as another human. And she realized she didn't do that because if she saw this person as like another human, then he would end up on her couch, you know, like that. When the heart opens, it doesn't have boundaries, and it just wants to
Mm,
relieve all suffering. And it's overwhelming, especially in this day and
yeah.
age when we know what's happening on the other side of the world. It's not like we live in a village of 100 people, where we're like, oh, someone's suffering, I can help. Now the world's suffering is, the whole world's suffering is in our feed every morning. And so it just
Hmm.
feels overwhelming. And I think we feel a sense of powerlessness, like it's too much
Mm.
for my individual hands and heart. Um, And so there, and one of my favorite quotes of Ram Dass is that we work to end suffering without attachment to whether suffering ends. Um, and so, how this has made sense to me is uh, that there's the 10,000 armed goddess of compassion, and that we don't have to be all 10,000 arms. That we get to be maybe just one of the fingers on one of the arms. And so it's like, what is ours to do? Like maybe mine to do is to love this 3-year-old in front of me, or maybe mine today is to send out emails for a cause I believe in, um or just um find the do the inner work of like finding where my limitations around kindness and compassion live in my own being, and begin to find some compassion for that. um so it is hard to open our hearts when we take on the whole of the world, because it feels so overwhelming. But when we do it in these small ways, when we show up, drive some refugees to English class, whatever it might
Mm.
be, like it actually feels really great. It's this like it's being able to chunk it down into this small. I mean, I don't know what it is, but in my experience, I find that if I can chunk it down. Now, when it comes to romantic love, that gets even trickier. When it comes to like actual, um, human relationships,
Yeah.
um, then it gets opening our hearts. There's just so much fear, so much desire to be seen and understood and met, and often
Hu-
not getting that.
humanness.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And so it's hard. It's easier to go into blame and shame.
It
Um,
is.
mhm. It's easier to intellectualize, go into judgment and criticism. And those, I'm really convinced that those pieces, like what we want to like judge and criticize are criticisms, right? Which is just more of the same. So it's like, oh, I'm being judgmental. Like there's a good reason why I'm being judgmental. I learned something, I'm protecting something.
Mm.
It's like, okay, instead of getting harsh with myself, like, oh my gosh, you're such a judgmental person, you're so horrible. It's like, can I have compassion for whatever part of that in myself is coming up to protect me from whatever it is I think I need to be protected from?
Right. Yeah. And do you meditate? I wanted to ask you. You of course. And
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I mean, I have a long journey with meditation. I've probably been meditating for about 20 years.
Mm,
And, it really started as a striving. It really started because of this, like, I needed to somehow be more spiritual, enlightened, or better. And it was like, if I
right.
did 200,000 mantras of whatever, then I would finally get there.
Yeah.
But there was this real, like, tension in my meditation. Um, and then and I love Pema Chodron talks about it really brilliantly in The Wisdom of No Escape,
Ooh. Yeah.
where she
Love
talks
that
about the
book.
middle path. And it's like, some people are really laxed and like, are lying down in their meditation and it's super, they're like, they need a little bit more strictness. And then there's the people who are like super strict and like super striving, and they actually need a little bit more softness. And that we're constantly like recalibrating. And so after years and years of like doing these intense mantra practices, there was a couple years where I just went outside in the morning and listened to the birds, because I needed some
Mm,
some heart. I needed some softness. Um, and it moves back and forth between various practices. Sometimes my mind's just an insane place and that doesn't want to quiet down. So I have to do other things first, so that I
mhm,
could eventually get to a place where I can get a little bit of stillness.
mhm. It's so controversial. It's like throwing a gear like a wrench in the whole in the whole gears. I think meditation.
I don't know.
You know how Ram Dass used to say, I feel like sometimes I use this as spiritual bypassing, but he used to say, if you don't want to meditate, don't meditate.
Yeah.
go out into the world and like like get full of like worldly stuff into the point where you have to meditate, where you really want to meditate.
I think one of the worst things we did was to make meditation this like to do, this have to, this striving, because meditation is really um like it's an incredible privilege, first of all, have the time and space to sit down and like try to find this other aspect of yourself. Um, and then, we just have such a history in the West of like our checkbox and our to do, and not actually being present with the actual thing itself. And so if we're like sitting down and forcing ourselves to meditate, like we're not really going to do much. But when we get like that, there is no other answer.
Hmm.
Um, then it's like, okay, like I have like, this is what I have to do now.
Yeah.
Um,
I was actually gonna ask you if maybe you wanted to do like a very short, like 1 minute meditation, maybe for those people who are listening and maybe have never meditated before and have no idea what we're talking about.
yeah, yeah, yeah. Love to.
All right. Okay,
Um,
sure.
so I'm just going to
Thank you.
uh, invite people to gently close your eyes, and we're going to get into our bodies. So just notice where your toes meet your feet, all 10 toes, the base of the toes, and feel the bottoms of your feet. Maybe they're on the floor. And just take a little bit of time to move our awareness up through the body, feeling the ankles, noticing the calves and shins, moving up through the knees and the thighs, noticing whatever it is you're sitting on, the support underneath of you. Moving up through your low belly and low back, maybe noticing the ribs move in and out with a breath. Maybe even noticing the chest might lift a little bit as you breathe in and then fall a little bit as you exhale. Same with the mid back. Just noticing your shoulders, maybe they relax a little bit as you bring your awareness to them. Moving down through your arms, your upper arms, your elbows, lower arms and wrists. Noticing the warmth in your palms and the lengths of your fingers. And then bringing your awareness back to the collarbones, feeling the length of the neck, maybe letting your jaw soften a little bit. The cheeks and the eyes maybe soften a little bit, and up to the top of your head. Now that we're a little bit more in our body, just let your awareness come to sounds. If you're on your computer, maybe you hear the fan of the computer, you can probably hear my voice. But there'll be more subtle sounds. Maybe the building you're in has these little pops or creaks, or if you're outside, maybe you'll hear birds. Allowing the sounds to come and go. And as you settle more into the sounds, one of the more subtle sounds is the sound of your own breath. Sometimes it sounds like a whisper, like a so on the inhale and a hum on the exhale. So maybe, or some variation thereof. But just see if you can hear that sound, hear that breath, maybe even feel it as well. thoughts are going to come. 10,000 thoughts are going to come. It's fine. We're just doing this practice of concentration. And so all we have to do is notice the thoughts, whatever else is coming up, and gently return our attention to the sound of the breath. So and then the next thought will come up and grab your attention, and you'll say, "Oh yeah, thinking." And we'll come back to so to the breath. And that's the practice. It's just like a muscle we're trying to strengthen. When you first do it, you can lift 1 pound. And after a year of doing it, maybe you can lift 20. In the beginning, your mind's going to be all over the place. It's fine. All we're doing is, for 3 or 4 or 5 minutes, doing the practice of coming back to the breath. And when you're ready, just give yourself a nice, sweet smile. Notice how that feels in your system. Feel it in your heart, maybe your heart, a soft smile. And then come back into the space together.
Awesome. That
Thanks.
wasn't
Go ahead.
That's great. Thank you.
I don't
Yeah,
know. It's probably a couple minutes, but
no, that was perfect. That was so easy, simple. Now everybody listening can go back to whipping themselves. It's just a little break from that constant thinking, and it's also not ignoring the thoughts, right? It's not like, oh, I have to replace, like, the thought comes in, I have to replace the batteries for the fire alarm. It's not like, oh no, don't do that. It's not like it's a bad thought.
Well, here's what happens with meditation. So it's like you're in a river that's moving, right? Just moving river, like cloudy movie river. And then you put a dam in, and all of a sudden, like all of the things start to come up. It's like it's no longer moving. You've stopped the water from moving, and like 10,000 things start to come up. And so when you first start meditating, like all of these great thoughts will come up, and you'll want to write them down, and great ideas will come up, and like, and so it's not. The idea is that the mind is going to do this constantly, and we're usually pulled left and right by it. They call it the monkey mind, right? Sometimes it's the
Mhm.
water buffalo when it's dull, but typically it's overactive, so it's the monkey mind. Um, but as we get still and we're like, I'm just not going to grab that one. I'm just going to pay it no mind, because if it's important, it'll stay with you. It'll come back. You're just like, no mind, like whatever. Just pay it no mind. It's the breath, because the breath is the boat. The breath is the anchor that takes you through this, like these 10,000
Mm.
kaleidoscope thoughts, um, that eventually takes you to this like glimmer of gold, where you have that like insight and that connection to that deeper true self. Going back to the river analogy, it's like the water is stirred up with all of this silt, and as you just stop paying all of the silt mind, it starts to settle. And as it settles, then it's like you can see the flecks of gold at the
Mm.
underneath the clear water. And so that's all we're trying to do is just like pay it no mind. It's gonna, because if it's not that thought, it's gonna be one of 10,000 others. And typically they're the same thoughts over and over again. And typically a lot of those thoughts aren't very good thoughts for ourselves anyway, right? Like it's
Yeah.
self-criticism or various other things. It's just like pay it no mind. And like, oh my gosh, I've had some of the best book ideas in the world in meditation. And so when I'm done with so different people have different strategies. Like, so um, I at the end of a meditation, I'll journal. I had a
Mm.
mentor where he would give himself the first 3 minutes of meditation just to think everything, and then he'd be like,
Whoa,
okay, now I'm just going to pay attention to the breath.
that is awesome.
So there's different ways of like working with your particular way of being to find your way through, because we all have temperaments too. So we have to find the thing that works for our temperament.
One of the things that worked for me as far as coming into the moment was I think Duncan also told me this. It was really funny. He said, "Try to not be in the moment."
Ah, I love
Like,
that. So like try, yeah, I love it. Try not to think of an elephant.
you,
Try not to be in the moment.
yeah,
Yeah. Oh my gosh,
exactly.
there's
You
so many
can't. You
tricks.
really can't.
Yeah. Yeah. I love
Yeah,
that.
yeah. I have a question. If you had to choose maybe one Ram Dass quote that okay. Let me
The
rephrase
question, and I'm
it.
like, oh my gosh, there's a different quote for every different situation. I can't think of. Um, let's see. So I already gave you one
What's
of
one
my.
that yeah, what's
I
one that
gave you one of my. We
challenges
work
you?
to end suffering without attachment to whether suffering ends. I think that's one I go back to
That yeah.
over and over again. Um,
So,
um,
yeah.
gosh, I mean, I grabbed I grabbed one of his books. There's this great book if you don't know it. It's called Words of Wisdom, and it's just a bunch of Ram Dass quotes.
Mm,
Um,
yeah.
and there's one like you can't push away the world. You have to enter it, enter into life fully to become free. Um, there's just so many great ones.
That one's really nice.
Yeah. And it's like if you gave me like if you were to talk about like a something up in the world, like 10,000 Ram Dass quotes would come into my head. But just to come up with my
Mhm.
favorite one, I don't think there is one.
One that I have been always just kicking around is I love it because I'm in my third year in college now, and I'm kind of like leaving the nest into my family,
Yeah.
and it's interesting when you have um like your whole life living with your family, whether it was going to church or even meditating, like you had that someone who was like like almost making fun of you for like trying to meditate.
Mm.
But the quote is, if you think you're enlightened, go spend time with your family.
With your family version, totally. Never that one never changes.
Hmm.
That is a good one. Yeah, do
Yeah.
you have some other fun ones that you love?
Well, I like the one where it's like you can't have uh like the one without the two.
Mm,
Um,
mhm. There's another one that
because
I
it,
like a lot is all you can do is be an environment for someone else so that when this is typically when he'll use this one when people
yeah,
ask about like their family or they want others to know about this and he's like all you can do is be an environment like so when someone else is ready to come up for air they can and that means that
yeah,
we just have to work on ourselves right like that's really what it's about that it's all grist for the mill it's all for our own awakening.
right,
um
right. Sometimes I interpret that quote as coming like meaning behind the roles of the play, like maybe going like backstage and just being like, hey, you don't have to play Eric right now when you're with me. You can play your we're not in the stage
yeah.
right now. But it's so tricky because there's like no like type of like signal that says, okay, we're on air now. We are,
Yeah.
we're in the role, but it's
It reminds
it,
me of that story, like of he was like I'm not gonna tell it perfectly, but where he's driving his car and he's like chanting, and he gets pulled over by the state trooper, and he sees the state trooper as Krishna instead of a state trooper, and like the state trooper like feels it, and so like doesn't give him a ticket, and then they're like kicking the wheels of the car, and then they run out of things to talk about with the car, but like like he's
uh,
like just like getting out behind the roles and how it just changed the entire interaction. Um,
mhm.
that's one of my favorite stories. It's sort of what you're pointing at. It sounds like
Yeah,
to some degree.
yeah. Ramdas makes it sound so easy
He
to,
does, doesn't he?
yeah. It probably is. It's probably just like the humanness aspect that wants to make it difficult. In my opinion.
It's our habits. I mean, he
Hmm.
also like he had some amazing karma. Um,
Oh yeah.
I mean, hundreds of psychedelic trips are going to really help you get past your attachments to the ego self, the one identity. And then he had this incredible teacher where he just had his mind and his heart blown wide open. Um, and that's a really special thing. Not all of us get that.
Yeah. And did you ever meet Maharaji?
Mm-mm.
No? Did you meet Ram Dass?
So, no, I was hired for this position the day after he passed.
No
Um,
way.
hmm
Wow.
so, I've had some journeys where I've had long conversations with him. I get to listen to him all of the time. I get to have conversations with a lot of his old friends. Um,
Yeah.
so I've got to stay at his house. Like, there's just ways that I feel a connection, but I
Wow.
never got to meet him.
Wow. That
Hmm
is so cool.
hmm
I like to talk to Ram Dass a lot when I can. Just even if it's like pretend,
hmm
I'll still do it. I'll
hmm
still, maybe that's what a prayer is, you know? So
There's a great, he tells this great story of um someone in the audience being like, "Aren't you the guy who like talks to his imaginary guru in his head?" He's like, you know, like what's
Wow.
wrong with the power of
Right.
imagination? Um,
Right.
to be one of those boats that leads us. I mean, it can get tricky, right? Imagination can lead us in some um, dark spots, but like what we don't, what is imagination? We don't know, right? So I have all sorts of conversations with him, and when I'm
Yeah.
working on courses, I'm constantly talking to him and Maharaji and be like, "Hey, make sure you get the right stuff in front of me so I can put it in front of people."
Right. Because that's what he would say about Maharaji. And he would also say like, I'm not saying anything that you don't know, which I thought was interesting.
Yeah, it's just a because don't we feel that? Like, doesn't it often feel more like a remembering than a learning?
Yeah.
No.
Right.
And
Like
when
it's
it
like
really resonates, when it really lights us up, I think it mostly feels like a remembering.
here's one of my favorite Ramdas quotes.
Yeah.
I don't think Ramdas came up with it, but he would always say it. It's the do nothing and nothing shall go undone.
Yeah. Yeah.
I yeah. We're sitting around the fire telling the stories, you know, stories that we know. If you have time for one more question, I'd like to ask you about maybe the different stages of Ramdas. As like you being someone who listens to Ramdas so much, I like to think of Ramdas almost like baseball cards of like there's different different eras of Ramdas, like
Totally.
the psychology professor Harvard, you know,
Yeah.
the post stroke Ramdas, and sometimes he'll like talk about himself in other ways or his past lectures or even like the Buddhist or other cultures teachings and stuff, and he won't necessarily bash them, but he will sometimes like even contradict himself or well not necessarily contradict himself, but he'll be like, oh, I found this new like perspective from this culture, and he'll share it, and as he grows you can tell that he is always he always considered himself kind of a student.
hmm Absolutely.
and
Absolutely.
and how do you like not necessarily like picking podcasts, but how do you like work sometimes with like those different like the fact
Yeah.
that like one episode you have like the pre you know
Yeah. Well, it's I was I went to one of his memorials, which was really great
wow
in the fact that just hearing people reminisce about him was really, really sweet. And when he first got back from India, he was on fire. He was like so filled up and he was so passionate and he still had a lot of that like Ramdas professor lecturer, like
mm,
charismatic lecturer, and you can hear it in those early talks, like just that fire and that like, almost sharpness sometimes.
yeah
And then one of the things that that they said during the memorial that I really appreciated was after he had his stroke, he became the person we all thought he was. which was this idea that he really softened into his heart in a really big way. He got out of his intellect a little bit more. And so there's like a wisdom and a brilliance in both. Um,
Mm.
and and then there's the like the Seva eras in the 80 and 90 where he's really into social justice and social action and doing it from a place of compassion. So you can sort of see the different phases and the various things that he brought in. And it's again back to this, like, there's not one way. We're all coming from
Mm.
different places. We all find a different entry point in and different things that speak to us. And if I'm in a really intellectual spot, those early talks just like are so great. And when I want a little bit more
Right.
like sweetness, like his post stroke talks catch
Mm.
me there. And so I feel like he's still telling a lot of the same stories across all of those eras. Um, but they're done a little bit differently with a little bit different of a flavor. And I think they're all
Mm-hmm.
um, really important because we're all growing
Mm-hmm.
all of the time.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
It's interesting to think about, like, oh man, I wish I could have like met Ram Dass and been with him. But at the same time, I feel so lucky to have this archive of his whole life, like knowing how he lived his death, and I just think that it's so valuable. I should not take it for granted.
Yeah, we're really lucky that there's so many tapes and archives, and we're so lucky for Raghu who has this vision and this board who helps
Mm,
keep it going, and this incredible staff that works really hard. I don't think anyone has any idea how many people are behind the scenes, like doing the sound
yeah,
engineering and making sure it's like accessible on Facebook and social media, and digging in and finding the tapes. Like it just takes a lot of people
yeah,
to be able to bring these forward in a way that's like keeps the integrity of them
hmm,
in some way. So
yeah.
yeah, we're glad.
I
I'm glad that we get to do it.
Yeah, me too, man.
Yeah.
I am so grateful. I'm so grateful.
Yeah.
I heard of Ram Dass actually through Duncan Trussell, and
Hmm.
I don't think he's part of the Love Serve Remember Foundation, but like from there I met so many people that did were like that out of nowhere. They're like, "Oh, you're in the Love Serve Remember Foundation? What? That
Yeah.
is so crazy." How did you encounter Ram Dass's lectures? If you don't mind me asking.
Oh, originally, well, I lived in an ashram um, a long time ago.
Yeah.
And when I left, someone gave me this little picture of a dude in an Indian blanket and said, "Hey, just keep this in your car." It's like I had no idea who it was. I was like, "Okay." And it like moved from car to car to car with me. And then someone saw
Wow.
that picture and was like, "Oh, here's you should have this picture." And it was a picture of that same uh Indian guy in a blanket with this guy who had a big long beard, and they were looking at each other. And I put that in my wallet. I had no idea who they were. And then
Wow.
I sort of entered into this kirtan community. I went to one of my friend's house who was in that, and she had the picture of the dude in the blanket. And I was like, "Who is that?" And she's like, "Well, that's
Wow.
Neem Karoli Baba." I was like, "No way!" And this has been like years now that I had been carrying these pictures around, not knowing who they were.
Wow.
So I joke that they found me. That like this idea of we get carried on Maharaji's blanket
Wow.
even before we know. And so, I don't know, around that same time, I was studying um, Kabbalah with this guy down in near Charlotte, and that was the first time I ran into Ram Dass's "Be Here Now." So that's
That
sort
re-
of my journey into the Ram Dass world.
that shows that when you're ready, you're ready.
Hmm.
You can't take the skin of the snake before
Yeah,
it's
yeah,
ready.
and also just this idea of like, um, getting out of the idea of like I make things happen. This like, oh,
Hmm.
there's some threads that I'm on before I even know that I'm on them. And,
Right.
it's like the acorn turns into the oak, like it's not going to turn into an elm, no matter how much it wants to try to do something different. It's like, oh, okay, this was going to happen, or some version of this.
Ramdas sometimes said that if you would try to become nobody before you're somebody, there would be like it would get ugly or something.
Yeah. Yeah. Um, Mirabai Star talks about this with somebody else, maybe Richard Rohr, I don't remember. But just this idea, or maybe it was Andrew Harvey, this idea of a lot of the times we want to become nobody because we actually have like a fractured sense of our somebodyness. And it's actually more of an escape route because we haven't really learned a healthy somebody. Um, and so this idea of like learning how to be in this world as like we're here to be human, right? So like to learn how to be here and um, know our social security card.
Mm.
Another mentor of mine would be like to put our tail in the earth, so like to be here on some level. And then it's like once we've skillfully learned to be here, then it's like, oh, and I remember I'm more than just these roles. I'm more than just this. But if we stay sort of in the other planes, we can stay a little disassociated. Um,
Mm.
and that can be hard then. I don't know if
Yeah.
that makes sense.
Yeah, I think about it like music, uh like musicians have to become like really good musicians before they can start breaking like the music rules.
Totally. That's a great analogy. Yep. You kind of have to know the rules to break them well.
Hmm.
Hmm. That's a great analogy.
So someone has to do the dishes.
Exactly. Um,
Well, Jacqueline, thank you so much
Thank
for your
you.
time.
Yeah,
And
this is really fun. I'm glad we got to connect.
yeah, and for anybody who would like to get more into meditation, you guys offer meditation groups, or is it just yeah, you love
So
sort
yeah,
of
so there if you go onto the website ramdas.org, there's like a 5-day meditation that you can sign up for. There's also our Evergreen Library. There's a meditation course. I think it's like 149 a year. And then we have these groups once or twice a month where we meet via Zoom and we'll do a Ram Dass meditation together in the beginning of those. So they're really sweet. And you can just go to ramdas.org to the Wisdom Library and type in meditation, and all sorts of things will come up on meditation as well. Um, so, yeah,
I love that page. All of that will be in the description.
yeah, great. Great.
Well, yeah, thank you so much. Hare
Thank
Krishna.
you so much. Yeah, have a great one.
You too, Jackie.
All right, take care.